Track limits were a huge point of contention at the Austrian Grand Prix, and the FIA have warned the drivers they will be just as strict in France this weekend. The drivers are not going to be happy again this weekend, as lap time warnings and penalties are going to be given out to those breaking the rules. This made the drivers furious in Austria, and we can expect the same fury in France this weekend. Let's see what the drivers and FIA have to say in preparation for the race at Paul Ricard. Max Verstappen believes it is almost impossible for the FIA to police track limits and has called for a review to take the pressure off race stewards. F1's governing body has been clamping down on track limit abuses this season, setting a hard and fast ruling in which drivers will be penalised for exceeding the white track boundary line. During the recent Austrian Grand Prix, Verstappen labelled the policing a joke after there were 43 infringements, notwithstanding sprint, qualifying and the support races. The Red Bull driver said, "We have good conversations between the drivers, and at the end of the day, more or less on most things we agree. Of course, everyone has their own opinions about certain things, but like track limits, the track limits debate in Austria was a bit of a joke, not only in F1 but in F2 and F3. Absolving the FIA of blame and calling for the sport as a whole to review the situation, reigning champion Verstappen suggested the current state of affairs is not good for F1. "We have to look into how we can make it better," said the current championship leader. Also for the stewards, and just the people involved with checking these track limits, I mean, it's almost impossible to check these kinds of things. You need, almost like one guy on one car the whole race to check the whole lap if he's not going outside of the white line. In Austria at least, in some places, you get naturally penalised if you go a bit wider and you touch the gravel. These kind of things, it just doesn't look good for the sport as well, and this is just one thing. Then the other thing are racing incidents and stuff. Sure, we can do better, we will work on it and we'll try to make it better. Officials at the Austrian Grand Prix were stretched to the absolute limit enforcing the track limit rules. During the qualifying session before the sprint race, Sergio Perez made it into Q3 with a lap time that would later be deleted. He was eventually relegated to P13 on the grid, which was where his best lap time would have left him. Pierre Gasly, the driver who missed out on Q3 because Sergio Perez was put through, was furious that he missed a chance to better his grid position. Zhou Guanyu was another driver who suffered from the race directors being overworked and making mistakes while policing the track limits. He was given a 5-second penalty for track limits that was revoked after the race, after the officials realised he hadn't actually passed the limit the 5 times needed to get a penalty. Red Bull team principal Christian Horner fears the problem will only be worse when F1 returns to Paul Ricard this weekend. The problem is the nature of the circuit at the Red Bull Ring. It invites the drivers to use the track limits, and of course there are many drivers that were infringing that over the weekend in Austria, explained Horner. "My concern isn't so much here, I think Paul Ricard will be a bigger issue." Asked why he believed the next venue would pose more of an issue, Horner replied, "There is genuine time gain to be had and you've got acres of tarmac there, so it's just inviting you to run offline." Despite the comments of Max Verstappen and Christian Horner, the FIA have decided to double down on their new strict stance on track limits in the race director's notes for the weekend. Eduardo Freitas will take the role of race director this weekend, while in Austria it was Niels Wittich. It's clear that the two are talking with each other and have taken on board the criticism of inconsistencies between the two of them. So what have they done to clarify the rules for the French Grand Prix? Well, part 16 of the race director's notes for the weekend reads as follows. In accordance with the provisions of Article 33.3, the white lines define the track edges. During qualifying and the race, each time a driver fails to negotiate with the exit of turn 10 will result in that lap time and the immediate following lap time being invalidated by the stewards. In Austria, they used the same rules regarding turn 10, where if drivers went outside of track limits, their time for the lap they were on and the next lap would be ruled out. In Austria, this was because of the advantage you could gain on the following lap by taking too much speed through turn 10, running wide of track limits, and then taking that speed into the start-finish straight, giving you an advantage into turn 1 of the following lap. It seems odd that turn 10 is called out at Paul Ricard, as the track has 15 corners. Going wide at turn 10 should, in theory, have no effect on the following lap. If it said turn 15, then that would be understandable, as going wide at the last turn of the track would give you an advantage on the following lap. It seems like a copy and paste mistake from Austria which the teams won't appreciate. They have also laid out some strict rules for how drivers must rejoin the track after going wide of track limits. If you remember in Montreal, there were red and white chevron boards that pointed drivers where they had to rejoin the track. These were added to stop drivers gaining an advantage by going wide. Without the bollards, drivers could have gained an advantage by leaving the track, and then they would have to give that advantage back or be punished with a potential penalty. That left a lot of ambiguity about just how much of an advantage they gained and how much they had to give back. Fernando Alonso got caught out by this in Miami earlier in the season when he got penalised for going wide of track limits and gaining an advantage even though he felt he'd given the advantage back. We won't give you all the track rejoining rules because there are a couple of sides of A4 long and honestly, they aren't that interesting. We're sure the drivers will do a great job of demonstrating the rules to you over the weekend anyway. In the time between the Austrian Grand Prix and this weekend's race at Paul Ricard, a few drivers have come out with some possible solutions to the track limit issue and have explained why it's such a problem for them. Sebastian Vettel was given a 5-second penalty in Austria and a penalty point for multiple infringements, but wasn't impressed when asked why it's such a difficult task to stay on track. "We're trying to go as fast as possible. Is that not fair?" Vettel said. "If we were all taking it easy, it'd be easy, but we're going as fast as we can and mistakes can happen. And it's sometimes difficult to judge 5-10 centimeters from the inside of the car where you don't actually see the line. So given that we can't see much, we're doing pretty well, and if we're really out by a meter or more, then something went wrong. But if we're out by a couple of centimeters, it's still a very good judgment, but obviously not good enough." Giving drivers a set amount of leeway for track limits is definitely not the right solution. If you tell drivers they can go up to a meter outside of track limits, all you do is stretch the track limits by a meter. But now it's harder for the race director to judge if they have gone over them or not. The white line really does need to stay as the limit of the track, but some drivers have suggested that changes to the tracks could make it easier for them to stay within the rules. Mercedes' George Russell said he sympathizes with the challenge faced by F1's two race directors. He believes F1 tracks need to make it less advantageous for drivers to run wide. "It's a very difficult job that the race director has," said Russell. "Ultimately, the race director's job is to police the rules. Now, are the rules and regulations correct for these current spec of cars? Ultimately, everything has to evolve. For me, you've got to go to the root cause of the problem, and the root cause is the circuits. You can't have drivers just running wild and doing what they want. But when you go to Austria and those curves are as flat as a pancake and you've got to judge a white line when the car is rolled and loaded, you can't feel a white line." Ferrari's Charles Leclerc echoed the difficulty of making the judgment on flat lines. "I think the best, me personally, what I preferred was the curb," Leclerc said. "Because the curb, you can feel it. Last year, sometimes we use the curbs as the reference for the track limits, and there you can feel it, so it's much easier. With the white line, it was so low that 5 centimeters out and you don't really realize it as a driver, but I think we just have to deal with it." The drivers get loads of physical feedback through the car of what is going on beneath the wheels, that a change to the curbs might be the best solution, especially if the drivers are already on side with it. If the curbs at the track limits gained a small amount of volume, they would be easy for the drivers to feel. It is so difficult to see exactly where you are while behind the wheel of an F1 car that the drivers need to be able to use another sense to feel where they are, and KERBS would provide this. Obviously, it's far too late to implement this at Paul Ricard for the French Grand Prix. Our expectation for this weekend is that there will be plenty of penalties handed out in qualifying and the race. This might lead to some surprises on the starting grid for Sunday, which for us as viewers only adds to the excitement of the weekend. We cannot wait. What are your predictions for the French Grand Prix? Let us know your top 3 finishers in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye bye.